As I said, COP26 is coming round. I think it's just in 11 days' time. Both myself and the Mayor will be present at COP26 with our key asks from Hackney Council. The Mayor is also, of course, chair of the London Council's Transport and Environmental Committee, and of course he's got a role to play for not just for Hackney, but of course for London, co-leading sort of the Green New Deal on behalf of the Mayor of London. And I don't want to do the talk on behalf of the Mayor, so he'll talk a bit more about that. But the reality is the council we only have control over 5%, direct control of 5% of the borough's emissions, and probably an influence over around sort of a third of that. And then the rest of that, of course, it sort of goes down to, to the public and, to people. And it's all about how we, go about our way of life, whether it's how we eat, how we, move around, how we, can shop, and how we wear our clothes and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's incredibly important that, as I said earlier, we need to do this working hand in hand. I think there's a big job for us to make sure that, that just transition is a key part of that. And myself being from, having grown up in Hackney on a council estate, I full well recognise that lots of people may work in sort of jobs that may not necessarily sort of be the most eco-friendly jobs. And what the last thing we want to do is obviously to impact some of our working class communities. And obviously we see social justice as a key part of everything that we're trying to achieve, to go hand in hand with our vision to rebuild a greener Hackney. So the work we've done to sort of co-design this event with you has helped inform how it will run. We want to hear your views about what a greener Hackney may look like, how we can open up these conversations further, how we can make sure there is space for diverse voices to share lived experiences and aspirations for their communities. And we've got some great engagement lined up with some schools that we're going to be doing ahead of COP. We're going to be at COP, as I said, potentially with a Hackney panel at COP 2. And the conversation doesn't just stop at COP. I think the danger of COP is that it's great and it's that big moment where we can actually sort of, all unite and get our ideas and really use that momentum to develop some of those ideas. But I'm also quite conscious that, a lot of this may sort of just be like, what happens after COP. And one of the things that Hackney's been extremely clear about is that the conversation for us doesn't stop at COP. We've got a climate summit, which is our version of our Citizens Assembly that we're going to be doing in January or in February at the very latest. So there's a bigger opportunity for us there to develop our climate action plan. And then, of course, the council is being extremely ambitious around our vision to rebuild a greener Hackney. And you see that, with our switch from our council energy to 100% renewable energy, our net zero energy strategy, which I know that lots of you have sort of fed into, our low traffic neighbourhood schemes, which, our latest one in Untitled Chapter, which has been extremely successful in increasing the number of pedestrians and cyclists along the borough. Our Green Homes programme, which is a £2 million investment to reduce energy bills for our residents. What we're doing around our EV infrastructure and, the installation of 296 electric vehicle charging points by the end of this year. And then, of course, an additional 3,000 by 2030. What we're doing around our LED lights and switching so far 69% to LED. And of course, hopefully by end of 2022, we'll be 100% as well. So look, the council is extremely ambitious, and obviously it's a priority for both myself and the Mayor to do all we can within the resources that we have. Obviously, we need support from government, both in terms of power and of course, financial resource as well. But I think, there's a big task to do about how we work together, and that's why this event is incredibly important. So I will now stop talking, because I know you're not here to listen to me. I know there's much more important speakers. And I just want to say, just before I pass over to Ramsey, a massive thank you to our speakers this morning. I know you're all very incredibly busy people, and I appreciate your time for Hackney Council and Hackney, the people of Hackney. So with that in mind, I'm going to say welcome once more and hand over to our event chair, Ramsey.
Hi everyone, thanks Councillor Caban. I won't take up too much time because there's a lot to get through, but hello to everyone who's come, and thanks very much for turning up. Welcome to this Green Recovery event, which has been facilitated by Hackney Council. For those who don't know, my name is Ramsey Albuquerque. I was the editor of the Hackney Gazette for 4 years until the end of 2019. One of the last editions I sent to the printers was a green edition. If you saw it, you might remember that we turned we turned the Gazette logo green for a week, in which the entire paper was dedicated to exploring what the climate emergency meant for Hackney, what the front lines were locally in that battle. So things like divesting council funds from dirty investments, what was happening to recycling, how young people felt, and how the council's ambitions compared to other boroughs. So I think that's why I've been asked to do this. So this is how the event is going to run. Oh, and just also quick housekeeping, sorry. If everyone could just make sure they're muted. I think one or two people who've just joined might not be. Just it means it will make the recording make a lot more sense at the end. So this is how it's going to run. There is a panel of 5 people here, so I'll introduce those in a sec. They're all going to answer the same question about what a green recovery means and what is most important as part of it. After that's happened, we'll have a short discussion just involving the panel based on some of the issues that come up during those answers, any points of contention, any things that they agree on, any further issues that come up. That whole process will take, I think, about 45 minutes. After that, you will be sent off into breakout groups. Don't worry about the admin for that. It's all going to happen for you. People at the council will kind of do all the work behind the scenes, and things will appear on the screen telling you what's going on. So just kind of sit back and let that happen. There's going to be 3 discussion workshops, one after the other, where you'll discuss a different topic in order. That goes on until 12:20, when we will all come back to the main room, which is here. There's a bit of feedback from the discussions that will take place, and then the event will end with a Q&A where all of the people who are in the meeting now can ask questions. I'll explain the admin of that when we come to it, because there's a lot to get through. Yeah, so it's been mentioned that the event's being recorded, just this main room, not the breakout sessions. And so the next thing to do really is to introduce the panel, which is the 5 people who are going to have this kind of discussion at the top of the meeting to sort of set the stage for some of the issues that are being discussed later on. So I don't know if the panel all kind of want to sort of wave or unmute themselves as I go through them, just so everyone can see sort of who they are. But first up, we've got Simone Ahiaku, who is a climate campaigner and educator. Simone, hopefully people can see you. James Diamond from the Sustainable Hackney umbrella group for green organisations in the borough. We've got Maria Allegre, who is an energy and climate change expert. She works at the European Climate Foundation, although she's here on her own behalf. Graham Hunter, who is the vicar.
Hello.
Hi, Graham. He's the vicar at St John at Hoxton, and was part of the group that helped put together this event in the first place. And we've got Phil Glanville, who's been the mayor of Hackney since 2016. So that's the panel, and also that's the order they're going to speak in. So we're going to go into the panel session now, and the way it's going to work is each person will have 3 minutes to respond to the same question. I'm going to ask the same question to all 5 members of the panel. I appreciate that isn't a huge amount of time to address such a big topic, so kind of bearing that in mind, please just be as concise as you can. I will let you know when 3 minutes is approaching done. And it's time to wrap up. And just to be fair to everyone and for everyone who's put together everything else today, if you can be kind of fairly strict about keeping to that time, I will sort of enforce it if I have to. So if you see me trying to stop you, please finish what you're saying within a few seconds. It's just so we can get through everything else. Okay, so the question I'm going to ask is this one. What does a green recovery mean to you? And what aspects do you feel are important and why? I'll say that again. What does a green recovery mean to you? And what aspects of it do you feel are important and why? So the first time, that's going to go to Simone Ahiaku. So 3 minutes when you're ready, please, Simone.
Thanks, Ramsey. Hey, everyone, I'm Simone. So like a green recovery to me is about like tackling climate change through understanding and taking action on past and present social inequality. It's rooting the current crisis in a connected struggle of like class, race, gender, disability, and other interlocking oppressions. A green recovery would require us to look at the current society and question how it's running. And it's about like why these systems were put in place in the first place and who and what does that serve. it's like how we got here isn't a coincidence. It's rather decades of like eroding at public services, community infrastructure, and society provisions. Like in our lifetimes, and maybe like beyond my lifetime as well, we've seen like higher education become privatized, aspects of healthcare become privatized, youth centers closed, key workers grossly mistreated and underpaid, green spaces being built over, and we've seen our government plunder like billions into fossil fuel projects and a fraction of that into renewable energy. And we've seen that with the Cambo Fields project, which was just kind of like officiated to go on in 2020, even though COP is in a month. And like going on from this in COVID-19, like for a lot of us, especially like in the borough of like Hackney, like Lambeth, Southwark, we've seen the way that like the social netting of the state has been eroded to next to nothing. We've seen the way that like demographics and communities have completely been forgotten about and left with little to no care or repair. Like going into COVID-19, we've seen the holes in these safety nets get bigger and bigger, and like it's still affecting those who are marginalized in the first place way more than others. And like a green recovery is about building a world that is on thriving and creating safe and like secure material conditions for people. It's about people feeling valued and feeling a stake in like the vision that we're creating as like a green recovery. And it's about working towards like a green recovery requires us to tackle these deep-rooted social issues. And without doing this, we will continue to reproduce the same conditions we're under with our current fossil fuel reliant society with just a green plaster over it. And we need to be like getting to the root of these issues. Tackling climate change and like achieving climate justice requires us to do that. Now, to me, like a green recovery will consist of increased workers' pay, particularly for key workers, because they are grossly underpaid and mistreated. And we should all be paid more for work that we do. Nationalised energy providers to tackle the UK's energy inequality, public transport that is accessible for disabled folks and working class people, also making it cheaper and providing free or alternative, options for like not using your car. More about social and sustainable housing, land, money, and resource being put into like gardening and food projects to encourage like community farming and tackling food insecurity. Local councils divesting our pension funds and other investments from the fossil fuel industry and redistributing that money in services that the community needs. An example in Hackney could be like a free bike scheme to tackle like air inequality. It could be putting that money into like domestic violence services such as Sister Space. And like outside of this, it could look like free breakfast programs in schools and after school clubs, creative opportunities for young people and youth centers, more care for like the elderly, and also like, just general community infrastructure. And then also...
I hate to cut you off. We've hit 3 minutes. If there's anything you want to say for the next for kind of 3 or 4 seconds, and then just to finish off, please do. But otherwise, if you want to pick it up during the discussion, there'll be more time later. So
definitely.
Great.
I will end by saying like a green recovery is something that we should all feel like we have stake in. Like communicating this in education and action is like the only way that a green recovery will become a reality for us all.
Great. Thanks so much, Simone. Okay, so the same question again is going to go now to James Diamond from Sustainable Hackney. Are you happy with the question, James? Do you want to hear it again? Or?
No, I'm happy with the question, but hi everybody. But wow, how did we follow that, Simone? That was fantastic. So just a few words about Sustainable Hackney. We're an umbrella group for green organisations and individuals in the borough. We've been going for about 10 years, and we help network and support our members, and we also run projects such as our Education for Sustainability campaign, Hackney Fixers, Hackney Food Partnership, and Films for Action. We're very keen to engage with the council on developing its climate action plans, and for that reason we're convening something called the Hackney Climate Coalition, which we're going to launch at our AGM next week to bring together individuals and organisations who want to engage in this agenda going forward. Personally, I've been an environmental professional for 25 years, working on a lot of these issues, and I've been involved in lots of local projects, including Hackney Energy, Ecoactive, and Hackney Fixers. So what does a green recovery mean to me? Well, what are we recovering from? We've had this huge impact of the pandemic, which we are still working out the effects of that. But one of the key things for me is that it surfaced and put into sharp relief the social inequalities that Simone was mentioning. So, for example, health inequalities and the digital divide, to mention just two. Hackney Fixers was involved in a computer refurbishment project to try and get devices out of people's drawers and desk drawers and cupboards and into the hands of school kids who desperately needed it to access their schoolwork during the lockdown. It also made us realize the value of things like access to nature and clean air on our mental health, the value of our health service and the strength of our communities, the massive response in supporting vulnerable people, and also the food networks that sprung up to help feed people who were in poverty during the pandemic. So for me, a green recovery means not going back to business as usual. It means building on those strengths and assets of Hackney to tackle those inequalities and steer us towards a low carbon, low waste circular economy. And I just want to give 3 examples of what that could mean. So there's a massive need to insulate our homes. I mean, forget fancy heat pumps. We just need basic stuff like good insulation to so that people can have a warm home where they're not spending too much on their energy, with energy prices are rocketing. So there's a huge need to retrofit our homes. Can we do that in a way that also creates local jobs and boosts our economy in Hackney? Obviously that would need a huge amount of government money, and the announcements we've heard this week are inadequate. So we need to put pressure on the government to do more. Second example I want to give is the digital and skills divide. I mentioned what Hackney Fixers was doing in the lockdown. We realised that our kids need to be digital natives going forward, and so they need to get access to devices and data equally early on and be supported to learn how to use those skills.
Yes, James, we are at 3 minutes.
Do you
want to just quickly run through the third thing?
The third thing is projects like community food growing and gardening, which help strengthen the resilience of our community and bring people together, so that we're going to need that resilience going forward.
Fab, thank you so much. And sorry again, I know it's a very short time, but there'll be a discussion afterwards where some of these things can be unpicked. Thanks very much, James. The next person I'd like to respond to that is Maria Allegre, who works at the European Climate Foundation. Maria, 3 minutes on that when you're ready, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. So building on what Simone and James have just mentioned, a green recovery to me means lifting communities and economies with policies that acknowledge and realize the social and economic benefits of the green economy and the energy transition. A green recovery means designing policies and initiatives with a vision and values based on people, planet, and profit. And in this sense, it's imperative that the green recovery does not replicate the injustices and the inequalities of the old system. This is a complete paradigm shift that requires fighting inertia and shaking the way we consume and produce. And in order to get the buy-in of communities for this phenomenal challenge, we need to make sure as many people as possible are on board and minimize the number of losers and mitigate the negative impacts on them.
Maria, could you put your video on, please? I think you might have turned it off.
It's on.
It's not. You've not flashed up for me. Can it? Oh, everyone else can see. I'm so sorry. Everyone else can see. Apologies.
Okay. So I also think that a green recovery from COVID can actually learn from the COVID response. The social and economic impacts of COVID-19 pale in comparison to those of climate change. But despite the difference in the scale of the consequences, I think there are 4 elements in the approach to this pandemic that we can build on to effectively carry out the set of strategic, global, local, and multi-sectoral commitments needed. The first element is the degree of cooperation required. You might remember by the end of March 2020, about 100 countries had imposed quarantines, resulted in the unprecedented disruption of the routines and the livelihoods of billions of people who had to isolate and discover a new normal. In this sense, achieving climate change goals also involves a coordinated, large-scale, individual and collective effort to build a new normality in the consumption of goods and services and a cultural transformation towards a circular economic system. The second element is the importance of making bold and timely decisions. The ability of many governments to take both preventive and crisis management measures has been questioned when tackling COVID. In the case of climate change, the problem is not any different, although the delays and hesitations have extended not for a couple of months, but for almost 3 decades since Rio 92, the first United Nations Conference on the Environment and Development. The most ambitious commitments made by the countries under the 2015 Paris Agreement cover only a portion of the emission reductions necessary to keep us on track. So we need to make governments accountable and make them be as ambitious as needed. Third element, and in line with the above, political will and determination to implement a coordinated and ambitious plan is necessary, both in the case of COVID-19 and climate change. Technologies exist to help with their containment. It is the incentives and the leadership to effectively deploy these technologies and these initiatives that are lagging behind. And the final and fourth element is the vulnerability of certain groups. This pandemic has been a major risk for senior adults, immunosuppressed people, and those with certain pre-existing health conditions. Moreover, structural and social and economic inequalities rendered deprived groups more vulnerable to COVID-19. We know for a fact at the same time that climate change is already affecting underprivileged populations who are exposed to air pollution, droughts and floods that affect livelihoods, food insecurity, forced migration, geopolitical conflicts, and not one, but multiple health crises. And I'm finishing with this.
That's fine.
So green policies must be deepened, accelerated, and expanded, and measures like sustainability, mobility, renewable energy, building renovations to improve energy efficiency, research and innovation, the restoration of biodiversity, and the circular economy must have a central role. And because I think that the simple and enormous teaching of this pandemic is that the solutions to the vital crises that are shaking over civilization.
I am going to have to pause you, Maria. There is obviously.
I'm done.
I'm sorry. I hate being.
That's all right.
Thank you. And next person, please. I'd like to answer that is Graham Hunter from St John at Hoxton. Graham, are you there?
Hello, everybody. Yes, Ramsey, thank you so much, and great to be here with you today. My name's Reverend Graham Hunter. I'm the vicar of St John's, Hoxton, down in the southwest corner of Hackney, where I've served here in this neighbourhood for the last 11 years, and part, of course, of the Diocese of London and the wider Church of England, with their 16,000 parish churches across our nation. I'm also involved in Citizens UK, Hackney and Islington Citizens, which is a coalition of different community groups and organisations working together for the common good. And I think in the climate crisis, we've come to understand much more fully the importance of understanding ecosystems and the integration of our ecosystem and the effect that one thing can have on another. And perhaps we've also come to learn in the pandemic, in many ways, also that we are integrated people as human beings, body, mind, spirit, head, heart, hands, that we have emotions, physical environments, that we can apply some of the learning about global ecosystems to our local environments as well. And we see the benefits of careful thinking about integration and the dangers and the risks of fragmented thinking. Through this piece of work that I've been privileged to be involved in, we've been thinking about how the green recovery needs to connect these different streams: home finance, fuel poverty, parks and open spaces, roads, travel and transport, training, skills, jobs, and the green economy, but also our global neighborhood, thinking about climate change and its global effects, and about places for healthy living, for our physical, emotional, and mental health to thrive and to flourish. And if I were just going to outline one of the challenges, I suppose, is it could feel as though the green recovery is just for those who can afford to care. And I think that's a real challenge, to make sure that all of our language and all of our programs and all of the conversation about the green recovery is rooted in the neighborhoods and the places in which people actually live and move and have their being. We know that the Hackney lanyard can be the kiss of death for some of these sorts of things. And so we need to make sure that this conversation and this work is embedded in local communities. Arguably for 40 years, we had statist approaches after the Second World War to solving problems. And then for another 40 years, market approaches to solving problems. And actually, we know that the state and the market both have a role to play, but they must be embedded in local communities and places. And so it needs to be about engaging local leadership in schools, mosques, residents associations, synagogues, community groups, and yes, churches. So my final points, I suppose, about the things I think are most important: creation care, recognizing that we are stewards and not owners of creation, and looking for stewardship rather than exploitation. Justice, making sure that the green recovery works and serves the purposes of economic justice for the poorest, the most marginalized. And then finally, perhaps thinking about our global neighbors. Whatever you think about Jesus, you may agree with the command he gave that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. You might not agree with anything else Jesus ever said, but maybe you will agree with that. And I think in a diverse and international and global community, as is represented in neighborhoods like Hoxton and across Hackney, we need to always be thinking about the effects of the climate crisis and what we do on our global neighbors.
Graham, thanks very much. I didn't even have to stop you. Cheers for that. And finally, that question, please, to Philip Glanville, the Mayor, when you're ready.
Thanks, Ramsey, and thank you to everyone that's just spoken. I'm going to throw away my script a little bit because I don't think you want to hear necessarily what the council is doing in a sort of emotional and political response to the question. What a green recovery means to me is tackling the essential challenge of climate change and air pollution and getting to net zero. It has to be. It's a global challenge. It's a Hackney challenge, but it is how you do that and embed social justice at its heart. And if we don't do that, if we don't bring it down to the local level, as people have been saying, we will A, fail, and we will B, not have the transformative change that so many of the previous speakers have been talking about. So for me, that is the critical bit. And I will look at it through a couple of prisms. The challenge of energy security is a national one. The challenge of energy poverty is a very personal one to many Hackney residents. And there is a top-down way of solving that. There is a way of, reacting to the current cost of living challenge by either increasing benefits or bailing out energy companies or doing those sorts of things. Then there's what was announced on Monday, which was a subsidy for the heat pump industry, effectively, which was not up to the task. I contrast why it's not up to the task. There's 25 million gas boilers in the UK. This subsidy is going to pay for around 90,000 homes to make that transition, and you probably have to own your own home and still be able to afford the other half of the heat pump. And you cannot install a heat pump, as I think James hinted at, unless you've insulated the home in the first place. So it isn't going to work. It's not going to embed the skills in our local economies, and it's short-term, top-down, and I think has all of the elements of failures of the programmes that we've seen in the past. A different method would be to invest long-term in insulation and retrofit. There is a £100 billion challenge in London around retrofit. It's around 2 billion for Hackney, perhaps a little more. If we did that now, if we committed to that, we could build a local supply chain, we could get the skills, the local SMEs, we could start having the conversations in our communities around what retrofit and what a cosy, warm home means. Because ultimately, when you come back down to people in Hackney, it is, can I afford to heat my home? Will it be a safe and healthy environment to bring up my family? And I think that is the sort of prism we need to look at this discussion. We did an amazing piece of work over the last decade to transform Hackney's housing stock through the Decent Homes programme, but the skills weren't left behind. It was top down, it was often inefficient, and I think we can do better if we have a localised based retrofit programme. So when I go to COP, when I talk about the role of local government, it isn't to then hoard power at a council level, it is then to distribute it and do the work that we're talking about. There are also some failures around some of the technological solutions, because I think we do want a just transition for business and personal travel. And so EV has a massive part to play in that. But if we just transfer the existing economy and the existing number of cars either in Hackney or the UK to EV, we missed all of those opportunities to reclaim our streets and have a different, more public-based transport solution, whether that's walking, cycling, public transport that's affordable. And so there are paths here and choices every step of the way that embed the inequalities that we already see, or they can be transformative. And I think if we look at each issue through that prism, and make the case to government, make the case to business that is about the local first, the community first, we can transform society and get to net zero, which is the ultimate aim of everything that we're trying to do.
Phil, I'm going to stop you, but I think you might be finished because you've stopped anyway. Yeah, great. Okay, fine. I'm just mute myself for no reason. Great. I think that is everyone on the panel. So thank you so much for all those answers. Some interesting questions already coming up in the chat that I can see. So we've now got about 15 minutes just to kind of reflect, for the panel to reflect on some of those issues that have come up during that discussion. Any kind of points of agreement or contention or anything. Anyone who wants to kind of respond to something that somebody else has said, please chime in. Something I thought might be kind of just a good cue for some of those discussions. A lot of the panel kind of alluded to agreeing that there's sort of work to be done on a sort of a bigger kind of structural economic level globally, as well as at a kind of grassroots community level. So I wondered if maybe in particular, I think maybe Simone and James might want to reflect on how can people ensure that their sort of energies as people and as campaigners is going to the right place and isn't just going into those kind of green sticking plasters that I think a few people talked about. How do we make sure that energy is going to the right place? If anyone from the panel wants to chime in on that, I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. Don't all talk at once.
I know I spoke last round and the question wasn't directed towards me, but I think one thing that we do have to be, I think we do have to crack on and do it with the tools and equipment and structures that we have at the moment while trying to change the economic settlement. I think we have a Conservative government. This is not a political conversation, but we have a Conservative government with a majority that is likely to take them to 2024, if not beyond. And we have a global system that's based around international finance and profit motive. If we don't, we are not going to change that overnight. And even the movement around climate change and the protests that we're going to see and the element of bringing the global south and the UK south to the COP summit, I want to make sure that we actually start delivering now, because if we don't start delivering now, with the imperfect structures we have, we're not going to get to net zero. We must get to net zero. If we can change society along the way, absolutely right. And every act we take must have social justice at its heart. We must not put the cost onto the poorest. All of that is really important. But I absolutely want the world that Simone was talking about. But I think if we're just focused sometimes on the big government, international societal changes, we won't do the stuff in our communities we can do right now. We must do both.
Simone, I wonder if you'd like to respond to some of that.
Yeah, I'd say that like it is about like who is like proposing the idea, who benefits and why. Like there are some climate solutions that are proposed that would require like the clearing of like a working class neighborhood in order to make them happen. So maybe they want to make like a new green enclosure, or they want to like create a new like crossrail or something, and it requires like clearing these people without providing any social housing or adequate housing for them. And I think like it's important to see how initiatives affect people, particularly like the like most marginalized or poorest in society. I'd also say like, yeah, there's a lot of it. Part of my speech that wasn't like said because we ran out of time is that a lot of it will come from like collective political education and collective action from like the masses. I don't think all solutions can be top down, and like many of the solutions that we have seen tackling climate change have been very much from grassroots communities, whether that's like establishing community gardens, community like projects where they take children to school, like carpool projects. So I think like encouraging and giving the resource to grassroots activists and communities that are already doing the work is a major part of achieving the green recovery, simply because like a lot of the communities that are most affected know the kind of changes that they want imposed. What they don't have is like the backing and like resource and money to make these changes on like a larger scale than their very, very, very immediate communities.
If I may, Ramsey, I'd just love
please do.
chip in. Thank you, because I think Simone's point is really well made, that grassroots communities have a vital part to play. Trouble is, it is only a part, but one initiative we've been involved in our local church and then has spread across the diocese is helping educate congregation members and communities about their choices in the energy market and about fair energy campaigns, and helping people switch supplier, because very often people are caught up in the monopolies that are created by the large market players and don't understand their options and opportunities for kind of market disruption. And similarly, work around green spaces, around road safety, all of those sorts of things that make the environment nicer for people to live in and to work in. So I would really just want to echo Simone's point and say there's a lot to be done in terms of the kind of grassroots activism and the support for that and the like. The trouble is that in the pursuit of decarbonisation, home heating is, boilers is a huge issue to be tackled. But Phil's made the point already. We work in the political reality of our age, and we have to do what we can.
Yeah, just to come back to Ramsey's question, how do we differentiate the sort of the greenwash from the good stuff? I think we have to look at the impact of each thing on inequality and carbon, and look for the win-wins on both. We don't want heat pumps because that's going to do, well, we do, but the government program on that is not going to tackle inequality. It's not going to tackle fuel poverty. It's not targeted in the right way. So that's what we need to look at for every policy that we come up with, is how is it going to impact inequality as well as carbon.
Great. Okay, thanks, guys. Anyone else want to respond to that before I sort of move the conversation on? Everyone seems fairly happy with that. Right, fine.
Ramsey, sorry.
Yeah.
Declare the interest in this. I'm in the process of actually arranging for an air source heat pump to be installed here in the vicarage in which I live. So it is part of the solution. It's not the only solution, but we will hopefully within a couple of months be entirely fossil fuel free, and all of our supply will be on solar PVs and green energy and things. But it's entirely right that it doesn't work for the vast majority of flats and residences and things. But let's make sure that we're not, for the point of any kind of political point scoring, avoiding things that do need to be done where it does work and where they can be done. We need a mixed economy, an ecosystem, a mixed ecology solution.
The mayor's raised his hand. Phil, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, Graham left it in a really good place there, but I think you do have to own the place in which you live to be able to access so many of the funds that were announced on Monday and the heat pump transition. I think it's James's point. If you really wanted to go to the heart of the crisis that people in this country are facing this winter, you'd have focused that energy somewhere else. And that, I think, is the tragedy of not focusing on fuel poverty and carbon at the same time.
Great, thank you. So something else, I think, a theme that kind of came up again and again was about public transport, in particular in the borough, and obviously people also do travel outside the borough as well. Did anybody want to pick up that kind of idea, particularly maybe talk about changes that are available to us, or what they think a more ideal version of what we currently have in Hackney might look like for people, especially for the communities we've been talking about, who are currently kind of at the sort of sharp end of some of these changes and who might be losing out otherwise? Anybody in particular? We've not heard from Maria during the discussion. I don't know if you want to chip in, or otherwise anybody else, just feel free to go ahead.
Sorry, can you just repeat the beginning of the question? I missed it.
Sorry, yeah, of course. I was just saying a theme that kind of came up, I think, during the panel responses was to do with public transport and making sure that we kind of deliver on a sort of a sustainable transport system for Hackney. I wondered if anyone had any thoughts about what that might look like compared to what we have at the moment, how it could be improved, maybe what the risks are for communities that could otherwise lose out if things do change. So transport is the question, really.
I suppose one of the hardest things for all of us, and I was cancelled on by a government minister earlier in the week, is that all of London's transport, the financial model that it's based on is the tube fare. It pays for everything else, and because of the pandemic, the tube fare, the fare box has gone. So there is no government state funding to support public transport in London. The only global capital, I think, or certainly the only Western global capital to be in that situation. And all of the people on this call that do own a car and pay the vehicle excise duty related to that car, none of that money comes to London either. So the poor tube passenger is trying to do sustainable transport, subsidise the buses, invest in infrastructure, make sure people are well paid, do the innovations like the hopper fare, and then council taxpayers are paying for all of the Freedom Pass and the things that ensure there is equity in our public transport system. So that is all totally broken. There is no sign the government is moving on that. And then you have Andy Burnham saying it's paradise in London. We need more of that in the north. And I think we do obviously need more of that equity in this country around public transport, its quality, frequency and affordability. But we're in a really, really toxic battle, I think, and financial challenge around that before we start, never mind where we want to go.
All right, thanks. That question didn't seem to elicit tons of responses, so there's something else I could move on to. Unless James, if you did want to say something, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we've got to be very careful about the sort of temptation that government has to sort of throw money at huge infrastructure projects without really tackling, the local needs. And we saw that with, HS2, and we've seen that with other projects in London as well. And if we look at what's happening in other cities around Europe, a lot of them, for example, Munich has a €1 flat fare for journeys across the whole of that city. Obviously that would need huge funding, but if you think about the money that's being poured into these infrastructure projects, some of that could have gone into subsidizing fares more strongly, and that would create a lot of options for people.
Thanks, James. So, Simone, you've got a hand. Please go ahead.
Couldn't find the raise hand icon, but yeah, I'd agree. Like, I think it's not enough to transport is expensive. For a lot of people, it's cheaper to drive your car than it is to get a monthly tube pass, and that is wrong. That isn't something that we should continue to allow to happen, because it just means that we aren't moving in the direction that we need to be doing. We're thinking about it now, a lot of these places that we are speaking about, for example, Hackney, not everyone works locally anymore. Most people commute vastly across London in order to reach their jobs, and sometimes commute multiple times a day, depending on if they have other jobs. So it means that we can't continue to allow these people to pay extortionate amounts of public transport fares just for needing to go to work. And on top of that, it also relates to the workers' pay, that people aren't being paid enough to cover their basic necessities like transport, like housing, like energy. So that's something that we also need to raise, that life is getting more expensive, yet our wages do not reflect the way that London's pricing is increasing, or across the UK. Thanks.
That's a good point. To sort of pick that up, but also to bring in something that came up in the chat earlier on. There's this kind of tension, isn't there, between kind of Hackney's position sort of globally, almost as this, we're almost kind of part of the 1% in completely global terms, in terms of our role in the global north and so on and so forth. But also there are people within Hackney who are really at the kind of losing end of that. Does anyone want to reflect maybe on that tension, or on perhaps how we can ensure that in the process of trying to make things better for people within our own community who are more vulnerable, that doesn't come at the expense of the global south through the mechanisms that we're all aware of, extractivism, outsourcing and so on. Graham, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Ramsey, if I may, no solutions, I'm afraid, but I think just to elucidate the tension, and an interesting thing that I think I've come to learn over the years here is that we have many people in our neighbourhood, in our community, who are very connected to the global south, because we are an international city, or an international borough, and an international community, and people have their uncles, aunties and children and grannies in every different nation of the world, and so in one sense I think it should be quite easy to make an appeal to the importance of the climate change and net zero and decarbonisation from the point of view of benefiting the global south, and particularly thinking about those areas of the world which are going to be worst affected by climate change. So we should be able to make that appeal. But on the other hand, and here's the paradox and the tension, I suppose, there's also a sense in which large numbers of people who live in Hackney, in London, have a slightly instrumental view of the city, the borough, the place where they live, which is that they may not be expecting to die here and be buried here. They may be expecting to work for a period of time, make a living, send money overseas, and then eventually when the time comes, move overseas to be kind of buried with their ancestors, as it were. And that can also actually diminish the sense of responsibility people have for their own locality. So there's no solution, but it's just a tension that I've observed and something I think we need to highlight for people.
Anybody want to pick up on that? Thanks, Graham. Yeah, Simone, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely do agree that there is a tension, but I do think that there's like I'm trying to think of the word. I think like we shouldn't be quick to kind of sweep the local issues of Hackney under the rug because of that, like being like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you know, when somebody tells you a problem and it's like, oh, that's not that bad compared to somebody else, and it's like, no, what the problem is a problem. And I think that like for the UK to be like one of the richest economies in the world, and for us to have so many socioeconomic problems where people don't have access to food or energy or transport or aren't being paid enough, is a problem in itself. And it's something that like people in the borough are living similarly to other people across the globe that don't have the same sort of economic or social structure that the UK has. So it's definitely like a tension, but it's also it's like the climate emergency does need to be tackled on both like a local and national level because of the vast inequality that's across the borough and across the UK. But I guess in terms of like a global perspective, it's so right that like the UK is very much late to this like climate change stuff and like proposing these solutions despite causing a lot of the like environmental damage we've seen over the years with like its investments. But I think it's like also about, yeah, holding our like council and like local councils and like government to account on where our money is going, because like local tax money, for example, or like public like tax money, a lot of it goes into these fossil fuel projects, and a lot of them aren't actually based in the UK. Like the Cambo Fields project is in the North Sea, but many of our extraction projects are in the global south. They're across the world in communities that like are facing a lot of the violence that comes with extractivism. So it's like, well, if we're not going to use this money to like if we don't want to use this money to invest in fossil fuels anymore, how are we using this money? Is it to provide like green energy projects? Is it to provide like social care and more safety nets for people here in the UK? How do we kind of support those in the global south with their own energy projects? How do we put ownership back into these countries? Because a lot of these countries where we like put in like investments, both green and fossil fuels, we own them. So it's like the profits that come from that go back to the UK, they go to Western countries. And it's like, well, that shouldn't be happening, because that's still a form of sort of like extractivism and neocolonialism that we're trying to move away from. So it's like, again, like how do we push ownership back to the countries and communities that have the resource and it's their land as well?
Thanks. I can see Maria and Phil have got their hands raised. We're basically at time, so I wonder if both Maria and Phil, if you've got kind of something kind of quick to say. Obviously, there's a Q&A at the end as well, so I don't want to. I'm sort of trying to balance not cutting people off with sort of managing the time. Maria, you've not spoken for a little while. Do you want to go first?
Just very, very briefly, and regarding this tension, we need to make sure that the Global South and the underserved local communities are not the ones who bear the costs, but the ones who can reap the benefits first. I think that's absolutely, it's a simple idea, but it's absolutely important. And back to what Simone said about extractivism, driving the energy transition requires mining industries to grow exponentially to supply all the minerals required to produce solar panels, to produce batteries, to produce wind turbines. So we need to make sure that we're not replicating the rationales and the logics that have been existing until now. That's all.
Thanks, Maria. And just very quickly, Phil, if you want to come back to that.
Yeah, I completely agree with Simone, and that's the point about EV. We can't continue an economic model that is based on untrammeled growth and damage to the global south, but also our planet more importantly. And waste and consumption have to be part of this debate. There's some good work on consumption-based emissions and not seeing the UK economy outsource them. And all the conversations around a circular economy are based on doing something different in that space. We also can't play off, I think it's really powerful what Simone said, you can't play off poorer people in Hackney with the global south and have them in competition when most of the emissions are actually produced by those that are wealthier than them in both places. And I suppose the final point is about climate resilience. There's been a lot of discussion in the chat about nature recovery. We need to make our city more resilient to that. 1.5 degree is still going to be really, really disruptive. We've seen it in the flooding in the UK. We see far worse flooding and disruption in the global south. So that work in our communities around nature recovery isn't just to make the borough look beautiful and a nice to do. Absolutely, that's part of it. But if we don't do that, the air pollution and heat and storm consequences will be even worse than they've been already. And I think, understanding that and working with communities to embed that environmental literacy is incredibly important. And then we must make sure that we do that globally through knowledge and financial transfer to make sure people don't get left behind.
Thanks, guys. So that's the kind of end of the panel section of this event. We're going to move on to the breakout sessions now, and I believe someone's going to probably pop up to explain how that's going to work, or people will otherwise just get assigned to the rooms on their own.
Can everyone else see that too?
Yeah, that looks good to me. Maria, if you want to go ahead.
Can you hear me? So the first question was like, how relevant do you feel a green recovery is to people's lives in the borough, and what matters to you most as an outcome? So there were a lot of interesting comments and insights to this question. And David and I found that framing and the use of language is absolutely key. The idea of simplifying the complexity of the issue and related to people's daily lives, to invite participation and foster accessible discussions that are as inviting as possible to different members of the community, recognizing differences in backgrounds, income, age, education, and also how important it is to identify and communicate the outcomes and impacts in the here and now. So how these green recovery initiatives, how climate change affects our daily life, for example, our ability to heat our homes in an affordable way. There's also a need to recognize the complexity of the starting point in the discussion, and how we're not starting from a level playing field, but rather from the complexities of our different backgrounds and our the diversity as a community, and how we need to integrate our concerns, our different concerns into the discussion to build together a solution and work together as a community. And also one other comment, very interesting, was that we should focus on the benefits rather than just stressing the challenges, the difficulties, and how catastrophic climate change can be. And basically one of the comments was saying we should take active steps to make sure that we focus on benefits, but also that these benefits are equally shared. And some examples were given in terms of access to green spaces and the sustainability of our food systems, and also training related to some new skills that might be needed to carry on with the green recovery, and in relation, of course, with employment opportunities. What else, David? Is there anything else I'm missing?
Well, no, I'm just going to pick up the final point about the extent to which it's really important to kind of recognize how this discussion and people's kind of connection to it or otherwise kind of reflects kind of existing kind of power structures and how agency is working or not for people. So I think a powerful way to recognize that is to sort of really focus on what the reality of people's life is like now. And so, things like food choices, heating choices, the cost of energy, particularly as we go into the winter. That is a good place to ground the discussion and to try and develop a sort of sense of how the sort of choices and involvement that people can kind of develop or commit to will help to sort of deliver benefits, which you can kind of be badged in this green recovery way. So we're also trying to work out, to what extent is green recovery a useful piece of language or not. I think generally I don't think there were sort of particularly strong views expressed either way in the breakout rooms. Please come back on the chat if you feel differently, by the way. But I think it's important not to not to regard it as something which can be defined too specifically, but rather is more of a kind of gateway into a sort of what does it mean for you type discussion with communities, and give people a sense of contributing to and kind of owning that discussion for real, rather than just sort of offering a kind of really prescribed view on it.
Do we go to the next question then?
Yeah. So shall I cover this one then, Maria, and then you can kind of come in as I did on the first slide.
Excellent.
So for question number 2, the question is, how do we ensure a green recovery does not create greater inequalities, and are there impacts you've already identified or can anticipate? So I guess the most a key part of answering that question about ensuring it does not create greater inequalities is really recognizing explicitly the existence of those inequalities now, and how they're kind of manifested in people's lives, as a kind of starting point for a discussion about the green recovery and how you're seeking to address it. And this was related to what I hope doesn't sound like kind of too technical an issue, which came up in a lot of discussions about the real importance of putting alongside the impact on inequality with the impact on kind of carbon reduction when we're considering choices and options and kind of prioritization about kind of collective action. So a good example in one of the discussions was focusing just on heat pumps is only really talking about a technology that is delivering potentially a sort of reduction in carbon, but focusing on fuel poverty is focusing on something which addresses inequality and how that's manifested, but which also has a carbon reduction implication in terms of the way in which it's used to address it. So much more kind of rigor in both the language, but also the kind of technical appraisal of options, which puts the existence of an impact on inequality alongside any kind of collective carbon reduction we're trying to achieve. And then a related issue which about trying as much as possible to ensure that the cumulative impacts of kind of connected policies or kind of groups of initiatives are considered as well in the same way. So a feeling that often when we're thinking about options, we're doing so in a very kind of discrete way, this option or that option, but actually what is maybe more meaningful and impactful and also helps us to address some of the kind of wider issues of inequality is genuinely thinking about the cumulative impact of actions taken together across a kind of wider range of areas like fuel poverty, access to green space, local food networks. Those are connected, and their impact will also be connected. There was a strong feeling that it's important to talk explicitly about what some people have dubbed a kind of just transition, and one version of that is ensuring that people who are currently working in kind of carbon intensive jobs or industries, it's not enough just to say we don't think those jobs should exist in the future. We have to kind of collectively and actively kind of manage a sort of transition of employment types and opportunities from a model as it's represented now based on kind of extractive fossil fuel economic models to something which is different, which I guess we have to kind of describe and create in some way. And crucial to that obviously is the involvement of kind of trade unions and other representative groups for groups of workers, but there's also a more general opportunity to connect in a much more effective way to those groups who are representing the interests of kind of communities defined or identified in different ways, and for public bodies to take more active steps to connect to trade unions, but also kind of a wider range of interest groups who I think are in many ways connected to and better understand and can represent more explicitly the interests of different groups in this discussion. There was lots of recognition of the importance of education and a reference to that not just being something which takes place early on, but creating opportunities to give people an opportunity to connect to education in a sort of longer term, lifelong way. But also in terms of addressing inequality, much more explicitly recognizing the barriers to kind of participation that exist now, and as well as thinking about the impacts in kind of carbon and sort of long-term inequality terms, and deliberately kind of creating structures of engagement and decision making that ensure a representation from a diversity of voices, and actively take steps to enable and facilitate that. Maria, do you want to add anything to that?
I just want to make a point around just transition and the importance of making collective sense of what the green recovery means and what the just transition means. And I have an anecdote. I had the chance to, a few months ago, to discuss just transition and the concept of the just transition with the representative of a labor union. And she said, well, we have not been involved in the discussion. So the definition of a just transition, to us, it means only an invitation to our own funeral. And I think that reflects in a very clear way how important it is to involve all the relevant stakeholders into the discussion to make, again, collective sense of what it means to materialize a green recovery.
Thanks. Should we move on to the third slide?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to go first on this one, and then I can?
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah.
The third question was, what are community groups doing to work with residents to promote behavior change? And what do you want to be able to do independently or with others? So key takeaways from this session, from this question, were that first, government engagement with communities can sometimes be clumsy. So it's very important for public bodies to enable, empower, and support communities to leverage existing and emergent work, knowledge, and networks. Then, that it will be ideal to give greater visibility of what community groups are trying to do for climate and the community, so that the community can join, can collaborate, and can find inspiration in these activities. And then also generating synergies between voluntary sector, the voluntary sector and public bodies. And something that really caught my attention in this session was the fact that across the different rooms, they were you were sharing the different initiatives and ideas and around Hackney, organized by community groups. And I think that it's a great example. There are many ways to be involved and to incorporate the green recovery and climate action into our daily lives, but by participating in community gardens or recycling appliances and computers, like one of the initiatives that James described during the panel. So, and again, like many interesting and initiatives within Hackney that can connect us to climate change on our daily lives.
Yeah, and one of the way in which we did this piece of work was to sort of track the Jamboards, if you like, sort of live as they were being developed. And one of the really interesting things about this third discussion was the way in which, once people started sharing these community level initiatives, it just like really took off. So there was like, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and it came through very strongly. The extent to which it already seems to be a real kind of energy and diversity around community level initiatives which are kind of connecting to this agenda either explicitly or implicitly. And it seems to us that there is probably going to be immediate value in just creating kind of greater visibility across different communities and people interested in this agenda of what is already going on. So that I think is an immediate thing which would deliver really kind of positive benefits. But what also came through, and I think, and there's an interesting kind of balance to be struck, and it's about a kind of wider way of working, is that people raising this issue of loading onto communities the expectation of delivering the change. And so this balance, particularly which kind of public bodies have to strike between, providing in some sense a sort of, a vision of where we can get to, particularly, when elected representatives are involved in bodies like local authorities, balancing that with, really kind of committing to supporting the ideas that emerge from communities. And those two ways of working can often, it seems to me, certainly in the health system where I've done a lot of work, they can often kind of work in tension with each other. And I think particularly for this agenda, there is a huge opportunity to really commit to a much more, without sounding kind of too jargony, sort of emergent way of working, where actually what you're doing is really trying to understand what communities are concerned with and trying to achieve, and finding ways to kind of leverage the resources that public bodies can bring to support and enable that, rather than kind of set priorities in any sort of higher level way. So I think this was a really interesting discussion to sort of track, because it just kind of really came alive when people kind of started sharing the initiatives they were connected to. So we're coming to the end of the period that we've been given for feedback. Just wanted to sort of qualify what we've offered by saying, obviously we didn't take part in the discussion groups. We probably missed quite a lot of really important points, but these, in the time that we were taking to kind of to scan and respond to the points that were made, these are some of the themes that came up. Not an attempt to be comprehensive, but hopefully these are some things which will be taken forward in the kind of collective work that you're going to do together, and which will kind of hopefully promote some discussion. I'm just going to open up the chat now and see if there's anything which we just wanted to kind of respond to from the last. So I'm just going to read through those. Let's have a look. Yes, we can. So yeah, I'd be very happy for those 3 slides to be shared. So I'm sure Thomas and others from the council team can enable that. And James Diamond just shared from Sustainable Hackney, seeking to create visibility of local projects on their website. That may be a good place to kind of start. But it doesn't seem as though there's any kind of other kind of responses or questions to the stuff that Maria and I have presented. But Maria, do you want to just close with any other points? Maria, is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish?
No, not on my side.
Okay, in which case, thanks very much for the chance to contribute to this. Really interesting. I'm supporting this work with the council, and I'll be attempting to sort of write up and share the content of today's discussion. So I look forward to doing that, and hopefully, continuing to do what I can to support this work in Hackney. I'm going to pass that back now to you, Ramsey. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Maria and David. That was really interesting. So we're going to pass on to Councillor Mete Coban now, who is the Cabinet Member in Hackney Council for the climate emergency. And he's going to talk a bit about next steps, what happens next, and other opportunities for more dialogue. So Councillor Coban, are you around?
Thank you, Ramsey, and thank you everyone so much for your contribution. Obviously, David and Maria for the feedback for the rest of the group. I think it's been incredibly insightful for us as a council, and obviously as us as elected officials, to sort of hear some of the views that are coming out of those discussions. I won't sort of kind of go back into repeating a lot of what has already been said in terms of the feedback, but I think it's definitely incredibly. I think the last points that were made specifically around sort of the anxiety around making sure how we work with our communities, and obviously how it doesn't happen to them, we work together with them, I think is incredibly important. And I think we're going to be doing a lot around that, which kind of leads me to sort of what I wanted to talk about now, which is about how we make sure that this is just the beginning of the long-term conversation. So of course we're here today, but it's definitely if people who wanted to be part of this conversation but weren't able to for one reason or another, don't worry. I think we're going to be doing a lot more of this, and I know whether it's myself, the mayor, and I know we're both incredibly passionate about engagement, and so this is part of just the beginning of a longer term conversation. It's going to be used to obviously help report back to sort of we're going to sort of the feedback report will come out of today's event, and we'll be taking that to the council cabinet in January, and then obviously we're going to be hosting our climate summit which is going to be incredibly important. We did commit to a citizens' assembly when we declared a climate emergency in July 2019, and obviously the climate summit will be exactly that. It's about how do we make sure that we engage voices across Hackney who typically, just don't have the time to engage with the council because of their sort of, they obviously have to sort of provide for their families and they're working. So we're going to be working incredibly hard to make sure that we're getting the right people around the table. And obviously, we'll be dependent, we want to see you there, but of course we also want to work with you to make sure that we're getting the right people around the table. So both today's event and the climate summit in the new year will feed into sort of the development of what our climate action plans before we consult again with the public in the new year. I do want to say as well around that there's going to be a lot more stuff happening. We've got engagement with young people that we're going to be doing sort of ahead of COP, at COP, sort of post COP as well. We did kick off. We launched the roadmap to net zero during the climate action week in June, together with the mayor at Cardinal Pole School. We spoke to a group of young people, and we're going to be looking at sort of bringing 3 or 4 schools together in early November, so first week of COP, and then hopefully follow that up at COP as well. So any ideas that you have in terms of how we can better engage with communities, but also I'm quite conscious that I don't want this to sort of be just the council model of us talking to people all the time. So if you've got any ideas and platforms, or if are taking place that you'd like to see both myself and the mayor attend, please do reach out to us. I think it's really important that we're also there to listen to those different sort of conversations that are taking place. But once again, thank you so much for coming. I think there's now going to be an opportunity for a Q&A. So I'll hand back over to Ramsey, but I think there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask both myself and the mayor some questions.
Thanks very much, Councillor Coburn. Yeah, that's right. So we've got just over 15 minutes now, and that's for basically everyone who's attended today to ask Councillor Coburn or the mayor any questions they've got that have come out today on the theme, obviously, that we're all here to discuss. Not very long. Obviously, if you'd like to ask a question, please just keep it kind of as concise and as sort of specific as possible. I appreciate it's a huge subject, so it's difficult to do, but I will kind of shift people along if I think it's getting too long and the answer's not going to be forthcoming. The other thing I would say is if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. The way to do that is click on the reactions tab at the bottom, and raise hand is one of the options. If you can't make that work for whatever reason, just ping me a note in the chat and I'll come to you anyway, but the raised hand is the best way to do it. So it comes up in the order I can see. I think we've got Nick Rosen, first of all. Nick, you're muted. I think I can, yeah, I can't unmute people, so.
Hi, thanks, Ramsey. So we in breakout room 3, the consensus was that the energy poverty was the #1 issue that was being faced by some of the people who were dealing directly with people who live in the borough. And a couple of us were interested in the idea of how we could get more feedback from residents to the council, especially when it came to wasting of energy resources. And one person also raised the idea of being able to tell the council when idling motors were not being timed. And I wanted to ask Meet and Phil, what's happening about the council's energy company? Because that seems to me to be, energy is 75% of all carbon emissions. What about the council's energy company as a way of giving us a direct stake in tackling climate change and being able to also have social agendas for that energy company, which would help the organisations who are dealing with energy poverty in the borough? Thank you.
Are you doing questions of 3, Ramsey, or do you want to sort of come back individually?
I would say if you want to respond to each one as it comes, if that makes sense.
I'll start very quickly and then hand back to Mette. I suppose the framing of the energy company shifted as the administration moved in 2018. I'm really pleased we decided not to start the consumer energy arm. If you look at what's happened to Angelic Energy and Notting Hill Energy, Robin Hood Energy, and the challenges with the small disruptor companies in the energy market, I think if we'd had one of those even white label energy companies facing residents and selling energy, we would have got into some of the same difficulties that other places are doing. So I'm going to hand over to Matthew and say what it is doing now, but it's an energy services company and a much more focused on generation and interventions around fuel poverty than being that retail arm that we had maybe hoped to do, but probably wasn't the right decision given where the energy market is.
Sorry, just trying to find the unmute button. Nick, I think thanks so much for your question. I think we've actually corresponded, and I know I owe you I think I promised you a phone call. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I will get around to sort of giving you a call at some point. I think the mayor's right. I think, you know, because we haven't set the Hackney Light and Power as a separate company itself, that doesn't sort of draw back on our ambition in any way and form. I think we're incredibly sort of acute to sort of the importance of Hackney Light and Power, you know, really being sort of that, you know, the driving force behind the energy revolution that needs to take place in Hackney to really reduce our carbon emissions. I think in July, when you look at, we published a new net zero energy strategy that went through cabinet, and I could send a link on to that on the chat. I think there's some clear challenges that we obviously face, and you know, a lot of that is going to be looking at sort of the financing models, and you know, there's going to be an adaptation and exploration phase of the net zero energy strategy. So it's looking at, you know, retrofit heat pumps and everything that we're doing across the borough to do everything that we can, you know, both in terms of our buildings, you know, the materials in which our buildings are obviously built. We're obviously accelerating what we're doing around the electric vehicle charging points, for example, and you know, through Hackney Light and Power, what we are looking to do is to standardise all of our electric vehicle charging points. So it will be Hackney Light and Power branded across the borough. There's projects that we're doing on Woodbury Down, sort of development around heat pumps. Solar energy, for example, I launched the London Fields Lido to make it it's energy efficient. Working in collaboration with partners, what we've done with Stokey Energy and Stoke Newington School. I mean, obviously this was a project that wasn't led by the council, but obviously we supported. But it's the type of partnerships that need to take place in Hackney for us to really get to where we need to, which is, you know, a local energy company working together with a school, backed by, funded by GLA, supported by Hackney Council. So you, out of it, what you're getting is you're getting green jobs, you're getting cleaner, I mean, obviously energy efficiency and saving bills for the school as well in the long term. And those are the sorts of partnerships that we need to sort of anchor as a council if we are truly to sort of reduce emissions. What we are currently doing, as I said, is we've got the net zero energy strategy, which is the framework for that model to happen. And there's a process now which is taking place, which is about, you know, exploring the financing models in which we need to take place. There's going to be a lot of trials over the next couple of years where we're piloting lots of different projects. So that's looking at solar energy across our existing housing stock. So we're doing a feasibility study around that. Obviously, we had Bannister House, for example, that we had the solar energy into. There are other potential council estates that we're looking at as well. So it would be really good to sort of continue that conversation, but more detail will follow on that sort of in the near future. And I think I'll owe you an email around sort of the update around what Hackney Light and Power has been up to, but by no means we're sort of drawing back any ambition on Hackney Light and Power.
Great, thanks, Councillor Kevin. I will just say a quick housekeeping thing. If you and Phil could just sort of try and limit the amount of time that you're answering questions for, just to get everyone in, I will just sort of cut you off otherwise. But I appreciate that was a complicated one. Steve Webster is the next hand I've got up. Steve, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, hi there. It seems to me that the voices of the 30,000 plus residents who live on Hackney Council estates and street properties is absent from today's discussions. Also as well, there doesn't seem to be any reflection or recognition of all the positive things which are happening on council estates across the boroughs. For example, plant and urban orchards, reuse, recycle projects, grow food projects, campaign and to encourage the council to insulate and install double glaze and glazed windows on properties on the estate. That doesn't seem to be reflected in here. So my question is what the council representatives and the large organisations who are represented here today, what are their plans to ensure that there is a representation of voices from the 30,000 plus people who live on the estates?
Thanks, Steve. If you guys want to answer.
Steve, it's a really good question. I think we referenced that the RLG was represented here, and I think it was covered off in some of the areas that we were talking about earlier. So I can see you, I can see Jackie, I can see Sheila, who's just left. We wanted to make sure that your voice was represented here. The prism at which we're approaching this issue was green economy and green recovery in this meeting. But I think what we just heard from you is loud and clear. We need to make sure that Councillor Woodley, Councillor Mackenzie and their teams in the conversation we take onwards about biodiversity, estates and energy, that there is detailed engagement and co-production with our tenants and leaseholders and the organised tenants movement. And you have my assurance that we will do that. It is a partnership effort though, and we had to focus down for this first meeting on this topic as a way into the conversation. But I completely take your point.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I've got a question from Gerard.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what struck me from the panel discussion earlier on is just the large number of really important issues that come under the umbrella of green recovery. But I was surprised that there was very little discussion at that panel discussion around biodiversity. Despite the fact that the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, and the role that cities can play in nature recovery. To be fair, the Mayor did mention nature recovery briefly at the end of that panel discussion. He's just mentioned biodiversity now. But I think that was the first time I've actually heard the word biodiversity mentioned in the whole of these like 3 hours, despite the fact that we've just had a first phase of another big UN conference on biodiversity, and that the council is developing its own nature recovery plan. And in our breakout group, we discussed a number of important community initiatives that are happening on the ground to bring back nature in Haggerston, on the Nightingale Estate, on Hackney Downs, as Steve just mentioned, on other council estates as well. So I just wanted to know how the Mayor and Mette respond to that.
I will just very quickly and then hand over to Mette because I don't want mine to be the only voice. I think it's that point about making sure that when we look at our next investment in this area, that we partner with communities around green infrastructure, biodiversity and nature recovery. I think we've done some work to sort of move out of the way to ensure that community projects can now happen. My impression is we're far more enabling than we once were. We've risen to the challenge of things like Stop the Spray and that sort of movement to see that urban rewilding. But we still have some way to go to create some of the kinds of funding streams that you see coming more out of the Mayor of London. And I want to see that so that we do some co-production. And what I don't want to see is if we prioritise this in our capital programmes as we need to, and we look at the planning system to deliver that planning gauge, but then we hoard that as a council. I think I said that really clearly earlier on. I want to make sure that we get a percentage of that investment directly into communities so they can play their part, not put the burden on communities, not dilute council expertise or jobs, but make sure we're doing more in partnership.
Yeah, I think just I mean, the Mayor's obviously, I think very eloquently sort of answers the question. I think just to sort of in the short time that we do have, just to come back on that, you know, we are due to publish launch our nature recovery plan in January, and obviously it's something that we are incredibly sort of passionate about, working across different portfolios across the council, in the cabinet, and obviously through the leadership of the Mayor as well. So once we get more detail, it'll be great to sort of obviously we're going to go into the climate summit. You know, we'll have lots of other opportunities to further explore that as we launch the nature recovery plan, but I'm sure it'll be great to have your input on that as well.
Thanks very much. So the next question I can see is from Richard Payne.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the Green Recovery event has been very, very positive and thrown up some really interesting, questions and debate. But for me, I'm afraid I think it's overshadowed by something that doesn't get mentioned very often. I think there are two elephants in the room, or rather a big elephant and a baby elephant. And I think these questions need to be resolved. I refer first of all to the baby elephant, which I think is the council's pension fund contributions to fossil fuel corporations, which amount to about £34 million per annum. Maybe small, but still significant. And I think, we need to heed what is being said by the IPCC and remove all funding from fossil fuels. And I think the council has got a duty to act on that as soon as possible. The other larger elephant, I think, is the Edmonton Incinerator. And we talked a lot about, addressing historic inequalities of class, race and ethnicity. And the Edmonton Incinerator, like many incinerators, is planted in one of the poorest areas of the seven boroughs. We know it creates massive amounts of toxic pollution, or will do when it is constructed, and the construction is already being prepared. It's going to create a lot of carbon emissions, and I want to know how this is going to be resolved before we can really talk about a green recovery and move on from this. And I'm aware that Councillor Coban is a councillor on the NWA, and I'd like to know what the position of the council is. Will it be independently reviewed? Will it be stalled? And what's the council's attitude to that?
Thanks, Richard. If I could ask Mette and Philip to kind of pick one person to answer each question rather than both of you, just for the sake of time. You can answer one each, but I don't want to go.
Sure, I'll start with the incinerator, and then if the mayor wants to come in on the pension, I think that makes yeah. Is that right, Ramsey? Yeah, cool. So great question. Obviously, I think just firstly, it's important to know, and I think your question is a very important question. I don't think it's one or the other. I think when we're talking about green recovery, I think often one of the things when we're in these conversations about, talking about how we tackle the climate crisis, it's almost like, well, if we're not doing this, then why are we focusing on these things if we're not doing this? And I think, it's not a zero-sum game, or it's not that or this. I think there's a lot of actions the council needs to take. So I think that's really important to recognise, albeit your question's extremely important. I think specifically on the incinerator, what we have done, and just by way of kind of information for everyone, is we did change our waste policy to fortnightly waste collections in March, and we have seen an increase in more people recycling in the borough. I think we're above now 30% for the first time in Hackney's history, when you compare that to sort of 98, when we only had a recycling rate of 1% in the borough. I think the reality is obviously we have to do something with the waste that we do have, with the residual waste. And obviously the current incinerator isn't it's get to the point where it's on its last legs, and it's not the most environmentally friendly in its current form. So we do need to do something with our residual waste. And, with the options that we do have, sending to landfill is obviously not an option because of the greenhouse emissions that are emitted from that. We can't send it to another incinerator and pass the buck to somewhere else in the world, or sort of the global south, or places where, they have to deal with it. So the new incinerator is obviously, it's sort of the next best option in terms of environmental. Essentially where we want to get to is get to the point where we're obviously encouraging people to, it's the 3 R's, right? It's like reduce, recycle and reuse. And that's the sort of point where we need to get to in Hackney. And obviously, I know that there are some concerns about the North London, sort of the new incinerator. We have been, in conversations around sort of the size of the plant, sort of moving forward, and whether, taking into account sort of the environmental bill and some of the legislation that's going to come, that's going to be pushing people to standardise around recycling, and whether that increases our recycling rates, and then what then happens. So those questions are obviously being asked and things that are being raised, but I think, the reality remains is that you still need to do something with the waste that you have. And, the Edmonton Incinerator is the best option for that. I mean, unless there's anything else that, we're not aware of, or, there's no other option. We have to do something with the residual waste. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's not probably going to be satisfying, given that you have, I know you'd probably want to see sort of no incinerator sort of being sort of established, but the fact remains that we have a large number of residual waste. Recycling rates are going in the right direction, but we have to do something with the residual waste. I think Councillor Claire Potter spoke about recycling rates on recycling on council estates, and one of the things that we need to do on the chat she just mentioned is we need to look at our recycling infrastructure on council estates. I know from being on a council estate, one of the biggest problems that we had when I was growing up was space. So we need to look at that and continue our work around that area.
I can see in the chat there's a request, Mete, I think it's James separately to talk about that. So maybe if you guys want to pick that up separately. Phil, I think there was another question to you as well.
Yeah, I completely appreciate the Divest campaign and the work they've been doing to put pressure on our pensions committee and our pension fund. And I think we've responded to that, and we actually have delivered far more than many of the other boroughs that have committed to what in theory was full divestment. We set our 2016 target on a line to the 2-degree Paris scenario. We've obviously set through the climate emergency motion and the action plan that's followed, we need to align the work of the pensions committee to the more ambitious 1.5 scenario and the council-wide commitment to be carbon neutral by 2040. So that is the work that the pensions committee is currently doing underway. And just to reflect, 35 million is mentioned, but actually less than 2% of our fund is invested in any of the extractive industries. Compare that to 5% that is now being invested in renewable infrastructure, and also the work in only 5 years reduced by 50% our exposure. Some of the rise in our exposure has actually been counterintuitively, given where I hope those extractive industries will be in a couple of years' time. The value of that investment in those industries has risen, not our proportion that's invested in them, and that's sometimes missed in this debate. But I know that Chair of the Pensions Committee, which is independent of my executive authority, is utterly committed though to this agenda, and has most crucially convinced the wider local government pension sort of family and treasurers and the advisors that this is the right direction to do. And meeting our financial and fiduciary duty to our beneficiaries, and I know Unison on the call, but also delivering that leadership that people are expecting from our investments. But it's not the council that makes these investments, it is the pension fund.
Thanks, Phil. And obviously these are questions that can be picked up further on as well. There's 2 more questions. I'm going to come to them both, but obviously anyone who would like to ask a question who's not asked it yet, I understand the council will take questions in the chat and can respond to them separately at a later date as well. So if you've got anything else, then please put it in there. I'm going to go to James Diamond. Gideon, I can see you put your hand up as well, so I will come to you too. But James, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi. I wanted to ask Mete Coban about the community engagement with developing the climate action plans. I mean, you were talking earlier about having a climate summit in January or February, and then doing a consultation on the climate action plans after they've already been written. I mean, we need to be having a conversation now about what's going into those plans, because you're probably working on them right at this moment. And it's very disappointing if all we get to do is comment on the end product. Can we see more community engagement with developing those climate action plans, please?
Again, Phil or Mete, if you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, I'll quickly come back. Sorry, my camera's off. I'm trying to get it to work, but my webcam is having an issue. Zoom problems. Still not there after 2 years, well, a year and a half of COVID. James, really good question. And what I would say to you is part of this conversation is actually feeding into what we are doing to feed it into our climate action plan. I think I should have been clear that there will be a feedback report from this session here today that will go to climate, and obviously will be used as a way to help shape our climate action plan. This isn't, and it's the same thing for the climate summit. This assembly is going to be used to shape our climate action plan. Of course, there needs to be a framework around that, and we're doing lots of work around sort of looking at best practice from around London through the framework that London Council has set as well. And there needs to be a framework in which this conversation can take place. But I think there may have been a misunderstanding, and I'm happy to communicate with you about the plan that we have and we have been doing with communities. I understand that you yourself have been working very closely with the team in the council to sort of be involved in this, and I just want to be clear that everyone's views here will be feeding into the climate action plan.
Great, thank you very much. Gideon, thank you for your patience. Do you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Can we please have a biodiversity officer? I think that would help with coordinating biodiversity policy. And we missed the opportunity for an ambitious LP33 concerning biodiversity. Are the planning department now on board with the green recovery?
Yes, at the end, absolutely. And there's a really good organogram of having LP33, the nature recovery strategy, green infrastructure all fits together. And perhaps that we can share with the group and what stage those plans are at in terms of development, refreshment, construction and governance, because I think that would help some of the points that James has made as well. On biodiversity within the Parks and Green Spaces strategy, there is a biodiversity officer for our Parks and Green Spaces team. But as I think we've sort of debated online before, Gideon, where that then sits in terms of planning expertise, I'm not sure if Mete may be able to update or we can take away, because obviously the delivery of these programs and the ability to take to challenge development around nature recovery and any credits that might flow from that is absolutely essential coming out of the Environment Bill.
Councillor Caban, if you have got a specific answer to that, then please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to really build on sort of what the mayor's already said, I think, we are obviously I'm working very closely with currently Deputy Mayor Nicholson and obviously the planning department around what that specifically sort of looks like, and we are exploring that, and hopefully it's something that, I think it's really important to know what we are looking to do across the council is to make sure that we've got and I said this to scrutiny panel 2 weeks ago, is that everything that we're doing around tackling the climate crisis and also around sustainability is no longer going to be something that is sort of an addition to what we do, or it's like, it's a thing that's nice to do. It's going to be a standard across the council. So every, what I would like to see, and we spoke about housing, for example, we spoke about planning, we spoke about, everything that we do has to have climate a standard in our ambition and reach our ambition to get to where we need to in terms of tackling the climate crisis. So whilst it's nice to have people and officers who have a specific title or specific job role, what I would like to see is about how do you get to the point where at a governance level, everyone who works within the council has that climate literacy. So we're doing a lot around climate literacy within the organisation at a senior management level, with councillors, with all staff at the council as well. And it's about thinking about, the carbon footprint in relation, not just in personal level, but in relation to the service area. So it's about how do you get everyone to think about it in terms of the work, and not just have one person within the organisation who keeps banging about it, but it's not getting the buy-in of everyone. So it's about really making sure that it's everyone's responsibility, and that's what our aim and ambition is.
Right. Thanks so much, Councillor Caban. That was the last question that I was aware of. Anyone else who's got one, if you put it in the chat, I believe the council was committed to come back to you in writing subsequently. So that is pretty much it. Just means I need to say thank you and wrap up, really. So thanks very much again to the panel members, to Simone, James, Maria, Graham, and to the Mayor, and to Councillor Caban as well, and to Matthew at the council who helped put this together, to Tom as well, who's helped facilitate it all at a technical level. As I say, any follow-up questions, I believe the council will address them. I don't know if Mete or Phil, you'd like to say any closing words, but other than that, I think that's it. Sorry, the recording will be posted publicly as well. You'll be able to watch that, but it needs to be cut down first, so that'll be a delay before that appears. So
I would just fit, the incredible amount of energy in the room, real passion, real expertise. I think none of us quite was clear about how this would play out and whether this event would be valued. Some questioned whether it was even viable given all the things that are going on. A huge amount of work has happened to make it happen from the community side and the council side. So just echo your thanks, Ramsey. And I think it provides a really good bedrock for taking co-production on climate change forward into the Climate Summit and Assembly in the new year. and in between then around some of the thematic areas that people have covered. So I'm just incredibly grateful for people's time in the middle of the day. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and just to Ramsey, just to echo the mayor's point, I think, as an administration, we're incredibly, we've been very clear and happy to say on record again, like, we want to do this working with you, and we very value your time for today. And I think, the council has done some amazing work in terms of delivery, and we see that through the update that we had in full council over the last 2 years in terms of the action that we've taken across the council. And now, obviously, we're developing the climate action plan, which is going to be incredibly important. So, I think we're absolutely incredibly committed to working with you. So if you want to reach out, I'll put my email address on the chat. I'm sure you can grab it online as well, but happy to meet with you individually. I know you're all speaking to different people within the council, but I think it's important that that at a political level, we're very, both myself and the mayor want to see this done in partnership. So thank you again for your time this morning. And Ramsey, if we were all in person, I would say we'll give you a massive round of applause, but I don't know how that works on Zoom, so we should try to do a virtual clap.
Thanks. No need, obviously. Great. Okay. Well, thanks everyone I should have said also thanks very much to all of the participants who came today and took part in the breakout sessions and asked questions. It's all, there's no point without that. So thanks very much. And that's that really. I'll see you all around in Hackney probably soon.